Hello and welcome to this Chemistry World webinar, Empowering Voices, Advancing Social Mobility in the Chemical Sciences, and it's taking place on Social Mobility Day. I'm Natalie Starkey, Chemistry World's science media producer, and I'm here with you for the next hour. Now, this webinar is being recorded, so if you find that you missed anything today or you just want to watch again, then look out in your inboxes for a link to the recording in the next few days. Now, I don't want to take up too much of your time before handing over to our brilliant speakers today, but I wanted to let you know that, as with all Chemistry World webinars, this session is interactive, which means you can ask questions about any aspect of what's covered in today's event. Please use the questions box, which you'll find on the GoToWebinar panel, to send in your questions as soon as they come to mind, and I'll be able to put those to our panel of guests in the live Q&A towards the end of the webinar. Now, you won't usually be able to see other people's questions in the box, but don't worry, because myself and the Chemistry World Webinars team can, so do start sending them in very soon. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. So I'll just invite them to turn on their cameras so you can see them, and then I'll do a little introduction for each of them. Hi, Louise. Hi, Stephen. And then we've got Saleha. Hi. Morning to you all. So we'll start with Stephen, who's going to be speaking first. Stephen Hendry is the Programme Manager for Socioeconomic Inclusion in the RSC Inclusion and Diversity team. He works to develop a deep understanding of the barriers and challenges experienced at all career stages for chemical scientists from low socioeconomic backgrounds. His work builds on previous RSC inclusion and diversity initiatives, acknowledging the importance of intersectionality in understanding the simultaneous forms of discrimination, disadvantage, and privilege that a marginalised or underrepresented individual may experience. And then we've got Louise Archer, who holds the Carl Mannheim Chair in Sociology of Education at University College London. Her research seeks to understand educational identities and inequalities across primary, secondary, higher and informal learning contexts. She's directed numerous large-scale national and international research studies, including the 14-year ESRC-funded ASPIRES study, which is a mixed methods research project examining what shapes the trajectories of young people from age 10 to 22. So we're going to hear more about that shortly. And then we're also really lucky to have Saleha Patel, who's an experienced leader in drug discovery. She studied for an undergraduate degree in biochemistry and an MSc in bioscience technology at the University of York, and she obtained a PhD from the University of Leicester before moving to AstraZeneca in 2017, where she's now working in the Emerging Innovations Unit. Saleha is passionate about talent development, mentoring young scientists and broadening opportunities for underrepresented groups, specifically supporting individuals with low socioeconomic backgrounds. So as you can see, we have some brilliant speakers with us today and we have a lot of content to get through. As I said, please do send in your questions as they come to mind. You're going to be hearing a lot, and as I'm going to remind you again, you will get a recording of the webinar, so if you miss anything, you'll be able to go back and listen again. But we're going to start with Stephen. So we're going to get his screen shared first of all, and then we'll move on to Louise and Saleha. Brilliant, that's your presentation. I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So hello everyone, my name is Stephen Hendry. I am the Programme Manager for Socioeconomic Inclusion, working within the Global Inclusion team at the Royal Society of Chemistry. Our team leads on inclusion and diversity initiatives to support the chemical sciences community and partnerships in the UK and internationally. In recent years, the RSC inclusion and diversity work has grown in prominence with increased focus on data and evidence to gain an in-depth understanding of the needs of underrepresented groups. Through our inclusion and diversity strategy, we aim to attract, develop and retain a diverse community of people choosing the chemical sciences and fulfilling their potential for a truly inclusive community. The RSC Chemistry for All report highlighted that socioeconomic inequalities were limiting the aspirations and career choices of young people and widening the education gap. Socioeconomic inclusion is a new strand of work which follows on from the Chemistry for All report, and it's funded by the RSC Chemist Community Fund. This work builds on our previous work in inclusion diversity and underlines the importance of intersectionality when considering socioeconomic inclusion. Our socioeconomic inclusion work focuses on inclusive access and inclusive progression from undergraduate onwards within both academia and industry. My colleagues within the RSE education team are looking at socioeconomic inclusion at primary and secondary level. This work will identify ways that the RSE can support socioeconomic inclusion by identifying the barriers experienced at all career stages to improve inclusion of individuals from low socioeconomic backgrounds. After much deliberation within the RSE Global Inclusion team and with our colleagues in data science, we have chosen to use the following questions for measuring socioeconomic background. These questions are underpinned by consultation with academic experts, think tanks, charities and employers, and it gives us a firm basis to develop and inform our work moving forward. We also had to identify what we wanted to know about socioeconomic inclusion within the chemical sciences. As socioeconomics varies globally, we will initially be focusing our work on socioeconomic inclusion within the UK. As a way to define this, we are counting anyone who went through the UK school system despite where they now live in the world, as this allows us to see the social mobility of the chemical sciences. We have then used these questions and incorporated them into all of our RSE surveys, from our membership, data diversity report, teaching surveys and our pay and reward. Aspire's research reported that out of a cohort of 524 chemistry A-level students, only 16% went on to study for degrees in chemistry or chemistry-related degrees in 2022. The comparatively lower progression of undergraduate chemistry courses relative to A-level may be down to chemistry's role as a gatekeeper into popular fields such as medicine, which may contribute to the low uptake. The percentage breakdown for socioeconomic background is constant from A-level into undergraduate level, and this potentially suggests that pupils from low socioeconomic backgrounds having already encountered barriers to progression by the ages of 16 and 18. HISA data looking at undergraduate shows no change in numbers of people from low socioeconomic backgrounds studying chemistry over the past 10 years. This replicates the trend seen across other physical sciences, and as such we can be confident that this is not unique to chemistry. Across the board, individuals from high socioeconomic backgrounds are 3 times more likely to attend university than those from intermediate or low socioeconomic backgrounds. It is a widely held belief that university plays a key role in increasing social mobility. However, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to drop out and less likely to graduate with a 2-1 or a first-class degree. They are 24% less likely to finish their degree. Students are also acutely aware of the impact of the cost of living, and those from low socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to go without heating, eating or socialising. Students are also aware of the impact that this has had on family members and their ability to financially support them during their studies, with 23% reluctant to ask for financial support because, in their own words, I feel like I'm trying to make my future better by destroying theirs. As a result, these students have chosen to take on more hours of paid work or relied on hardship funds to support themselves. Top selective universities have the highest success rates for students from low socioeconomic backgrounds. However, they do very poorly in terms of mobility, with students from low socioeconomic backgrounds less likely to attend the top universities, particularly those students who received free school meals. Unfortunately, socioeconomic data for masters, postgraduates and doctorate were excluded from further HISA analysis due to the high percentage of not classified or unknown data, with a non-responsive bias of over 92%. Furthermore, no socioeconomic data was available for graduates or staff via the HISA analysis. Data analysis of the RSE membership and pay and reward survey helps to explain possible interpretations from postgraduate onwards. However, there are some caveats which mean we cannot draw direct conclusions, and instead this will be used to guide our work towards more interesting and nuanced observations. We know that the majority of our respondents are over the ages of 45, with very few responses from those under the age of 30. As a result, it would be more likely for those over the age of 45 to be in an established career. The economy route into the chemical sciences, the job type distribution of the parents of a 74-year-old is significantly different from that of a 25-year-old, and on face value, this might imply that less young people are joining the chemical sciences. However, it could also imply that younger people are less likely to respond to the survey, less likely to be RSE members. We could also interpret this as those from this subgroup are more likely to respond to the survey, so those in the ages over 45. It could be that chemistry is a dying industry with a lack of young people coming into the chemical sciences, or that there are very few opportunities to join and move up. It could also be, when we are considering established careers, is that chemistry has more of a flat structure and most jobs are considered established careers very quickly. What we can take away is we can be confident that age of responders is a major confounder in our model. This demonstrates that any comparisons that we make with these variables will not be a simple interpretation, but will need to consider multiple factors and relationships to attempt to get an accurate understanding as it relates to our questions around socioeconomic inclusion. Thus, if we want to answer a question such as, does your socioeconomic background affect your ability to progress within the chemical sciences, whilst many of us may unfortunately say probably, the true nature of the relationship is highly entangled with many other variables. Because of the highly interactive nature of age and other variables, if we do not consider age when considering this question, then we may draw counterintuitive or incorrect conclusions. Research by the diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy, the Unmistakables, found that more than a quarter of employees find conversations about inclusion diversity initiatives frustrating, with 22% of employees finding them nerve-wracking. Most often it is marginalised groups who feel excluded from the dialogue, with many lacking the confidence in navigating workplace discussions, uncertain about what they can or cannot express. We know that social and economic inequalities are limiting the aspirations and career choices of some young people and widening the education gap. However, socioeconomic status has become the main ID topic that working professionals are actively avoiding through fear of getting something wrong. This could explain the lack of in-depth data due to perceived stigma, similar to what we found with our early work in disability, and this is impacting it and making it harder for us to consider the complexities that is influencing socioeconomic inclusion. Inevitably, there will be aspects of the work that fall outside the remit of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and like the tortoise, we need to move slowly and steadily using data and evidence to drive everything that we do and understand how the RSE can have the biggest impact for socioeconomic inclusion within the chemical sciences. As you can see from this presentation, there's been lots of interesting and significant data. However, it also raises questions around the complexity of our work, particularly around intersectional discrimination, which can be masked when looking at individual demographic categories. The lack of in-depth data makes it harder to consider the complexities, especially when everyone is affected in different ways, such as the long-term impact of COVID-19, increases in the cost of living, changing priorities, or it could also influence on the data collection, particularly around people being less willing to disclose information about their socioeconomic background. Socioeconomic inclusion work is vital for a prosperous and sustainable future within the chemical sciences. Our work will act as a reference point, hopefully making a lasting impact on socioeconomic equality within the chemical sciences and communicate the findings with our external stakeholders. Data is key to our approach, and this research will enable other organisations and members within the chemical sciences community to build the evidence base needed to make change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This is really important work, and I'm really glad that you've been able to present some of that today. Just to let the audience know, we're sharing all the links that we can see in the presentations in the chat box, so you should be able to see those and click those, save them for later, so that you've got them all, because there's a lot of information there to get through, I can see. Don't forget to send in your questions for our speakers. We've already had a few in for Stephen, so that's brilliant to see. We're going to move on to Louise now. So if we can get her camera on and get her screen shared, that would be brilliant. And then, yeah, then we'll be hearing from Saleha after that. So I can see your slides, Louise, so I think you're ready to take it away.
Fantastic, thanks very much. So yeah, lovely to be able to come and share our research. So if we can get this moving on, there we go. So obviously the context that we're talking about is we know that there are these really persistent, long-standing inequalities in STEM and chemistry participation from school through higher education, informal and so on. And as Stephen was mentioning, you know, we've got these injustices in society and a lack of social mobility. It's being exacerbated by COVID. There has been a lot of resource and effort being put into trying to change these issues, but there's quite slow change. Some of that we'd say is perhaps due to the very fragmented STEM education ecosystem we have. There have been challenges made that sometimes maybe we're obsessed with trying to document the gaps, the gap gazing fetish, just always do more research trying to show what they are rather than address them. And when we look across the range of interventions, quite a lot of them are deficit based. So that means they're often based on an assumed lack on the part of the person who's not included. So a lack of knowledge, a lack of motivation, a lack of understanding or exposure to chemistry or so on. So we have these multiple intersecting inequalities, but often the policies and the practices we have to address them are quite fragmented. And in particular, we'd say really not enough time and resource and support is given to practitioners to be able to understand and engage with these sort of complex intersecting inequalities. As a result, a lot of our STEM education, whether it's in school or out of school, is still largely serving and giving the best outcomes for more privileged young people. So the idea of the rich get richer. I won't dwell on this because Stephen set it out really well, but basically we know that there are these ongoing, very enduring, persistent inequalities in terms of participation by social class, and particularly by those from the most deprived quintiles are much less likely to participate. Generally, it's even more notable in STEM than non-STEM, and there are variations between different STEM areas. So they're particularly low in physics, for example. We also know it's not just access that is the issue. As Stephen was talking about, non-completion rates are higher among more disadvantaged communities. They vary between different subjects, but as we've heard, you know, it's much more likely that a young person from a working class background will not complete compared to one from a more privileged middle class background. So against this backdrop, our study is trying to really understand what shapes young people's STEM trajectories from age 10 up to 22. We particularly focus on this intersection of class, gender and race. And hopefully we want to try and inform more equitable and effective STEM education policy and practice. So our Aspire study has been going for some time. We've tracked a cohort of young people from age 10 up to 22 through mixed methods approach. We've got surveys and we've got longitudinal interviews of young people and their parents across 6 time points. So we've surveyed over 47,000 young people today. As you can see, we've picked them up at the end of primary school and continue through. We've also got these interviews, which we've managed to conduct over time to give this nice balance between a breadth and a depth of data to really try and understand what is it that shapes young people's trajectories. We've got lots of reports. For example, you can see there's one on chemistry if you want to look at those. And the study's been going a long time. There's a lot of outputs there. We've got over 44 publications, academic journal articles and so on. Basically, if you're interested in a subject, do look at our website and there's probably something there on it. So looking across this wealth of data, the things that we see as really helping to explain differential outcomes are the intersection of what we call identity, capital and field. And I'll just briefly talk through and explain those. But in a nutshell, what it's showing is that the more a young person's identity, they feel that that aligns with a particular area of STEM, the more they have, quote unquote, the right sort of resource and capital to support them to progress in that field. And the more that a field isn't putting up blocks and barriers to their progression, these things all make a strong difference. So the more you feel you're aligned and you've got the right sort of identity and capital to fit with the field, the more you're likely to continue in it. So by science or STEM identity, what I mean there is that the sense of both yourself as being a chemistry or a science or a STEM person, and the extent to which you're seen as that by others. So there's this, when we look at our quantitative data, it's significantly related to taking a STEM degree, but it's not, where there's a misalignment, this can be really impactful. So where a young person doesn't feel that their identity fits with the discipline, they're much less likely to participate in it, even when they're really good at it, even when their attainment is really high. Your capital, your resources, is important for growing and sustaining a STEM identity, but working class young people tend to have less access to key forms of STEM capital. And these prevalent associations of STEM or science with ideas of being clever, having a natural talent for it, really mediate your likelihood of being able to identify with it and participate in it, particularly in areas like maths. But these ideals of cleverness are classed and racialized and gendered, and it can be harder for young people from underrepresented communities to see themselves and be seen by others as fitting the kind of stereotype of who a science person is. So your identity interacts with your capital, and capital really is just a way of referring to all your science or STEM related resources or chemistry related resources that you might have, forms of social and cultural capital. So your dispositions, how you think about chemistry, whether you do chemistry related things in your spare time, who you know, do you talk with people about chemistry, are you encouraged by people to do chemistry. Statistically, we found that the more science related capital that you have, the more likely you are to have a STEM identity and to progress on to take one or more STEM A-levels and to take a STEM degree. But capital is unevenly distributed, and where there's less of these key sorts of capital, progression is much more difficult and more precarious. So if you're interested in the links, we've got links there that show that science capital relates to you taking a STEM degree or a STEM A-level, advanced level qualification, but it's not just good for continuing in STEM. Science capital, as the second reference there shows, it's also good for a whole range of positive outcomes. So when we looked, young people with high levels of science capital have positive outcomes at age 21, 22 in areas like active citizenship, having a high job satisfaction, feeling positive about the future, having good health. So science capital is good for you, whether or not you want to continue with science. And all of this takes place within what we call the field. So basically, particularly the educational field, we know that schools and teachers make a really big difference. We also know that the dominant cultures and practices in science fields can make it really hard for young people from underrepresented communities to access and persist in STEM. Statistically, we find that boys and more privileged students, those with high cultural capital, are much more likely to report being strongly encouraged to continue with science. And that for many young people from underrepresented communities, there's a bit of a chilly climate in science fields. They often feel like they don't belong. And we've also got very poignant examples in our data of how even young people with a lot of home science capital, a lot of support and interest and understanding, this can be mitigated and negated when they have really negative experiences of school science. For example, there's a young woman in our study called Vanessa who we've written about. So what influenced working class young people's social mobility or immobility in our study in relation to chemistry? I just want to share a couple of case studies with you just to exemplify the issues. And we're going to focus on two young people who we interviewed over time called Demi and Brittany. Now, they're both white working class young women. They both attended the same primary and secondary school. They were friends with one another. Demi's mum was a nurse and her dad was a builder. Brittany was from a single parent household. Her mum had left school at 16 and worked locally, and neither of them had any family history of going to university. So when we first met them at age 10, they both really liked science at school. You can see from the quotes there, they really particularly liked doing experiments. They both did well in science, and they did some sort of home science activities. So like Brittany talked about doing the sort of putting Mentos in Coke and exploding it with her sister, things like that. They both aspired to chemistry careers, along with other things. So in Demi's case, chemistry or fashion designer. Brittany was thinking of chemistry or a beautician, like some of her family members. And they had positive views of chemistry jobs. Demi's mum worked in a hospital, and she said her mum had told her that people who'd done chemistry, who had jobs in the hospital, had well-paid jobs. And Brittany had slightly more of a general sense that science generally leads to various jobs. They'd both really been inspired by a substantial university outreach course. They'd had a local university had come and worked with them over quite a long period of time. It wasn't just a one-off. And they'd had like little graduation ceremonies at the end. And this had inspired both of them to want to become the first in their family to go to university. They also slightly differed. Demi talked a lot about being not girly. Brittany was more girly and into sort of beauty and things. But Brittany was also very concerned about being seen as dumb, which is a theme that comes up with other working class young people in our research more broadly that we've written about. 12 to 16, Demi dropped her chemistry aspirations for a while because she, in her words, had terrible teachers who made her lose her passion for chemistry. But around the age of 15, 16, she had what she said were better teachers who re-engaged her with chemistry, and she started to aspire to jobs in sort of pharmacology. Brittany, around this time, also really loved chemistry. She kept her aspirations. She became a bit less sure when she was dropped down to lower attainment sets, but she was much less clear about what jobs chemistry could lead to. She also didn't manage to do any after-school clubs, despite being interested, because as her mum said, they didn't have the funding, the money to do it, and they couldn't get her there. She's a single parent, she just couldn't get her logistically to those. Around 17 to 18, Demi's parents strongly encouraged her to move away and go to a very strongly academic sixth form college. It was some distance, quite a long trek away from where she lived, whereas Brittany went to the local less academic college. Demi did her A-levels, chemistry, biology, maths. She went to this academic college that very strongly pushed them to university, and she had talked about the strong support she got from teachers at very key moments in her trajectory. She developed this personal connection with chemistry. She had loads of good outreach, she did work shadowing, and she ended up undertaking a combined master's degree at an elite university, where she also got good career support. She found the intensity of the course limited her interest, so she was thinking about leaving chemistry after her degree, but she'd had generally a positive time. Brittany, however, had quite a different trajectory. She got lower grades. She was interested in going to higher education, but the tutor in her college told her to not go and to wait and to do what she herself had done, wait and see how you go. She had to work long part-time hours to earn money during her studies and was really worried about the impact it was having on her study. Her mum was not sure about university. She worried about the debt. She was really unclear about whether chemistry would have job prospects, and it just felt too risky. So Brittany ended up staying in her part-time work, making it a full-time job in a supermarket. And in the latest interviews, as her mum recognised, maybe chemistry degree was always her aspiration inside, but they never felt it was financially viable. It was too risky. So the two young women kind of exemplify having they have similarities in their backgrounds, but also these differences in their family identity and capital, different social and economic constraints, the need to manage risk, particularly for Brittany. They also had different forms of luck. So in terms of the sort of teachers and the advice that they got from their teachers or tutors, which was very different and was part of what put them on these different paths. And this idea of having a lucky teacher or an unlucky tutor came up in our study more generally. When we looked at what made a difference to the working class young people in our study as to whether they became socially mobile or not, we found that luck was really important. So as you can see there, the majority of educationally mobile young people, so like those who became first in family to go to university, had these good luck experiences, whereas those who were immobile were much more likely to have bad luck. What we meant by luck, in particular, what made a difference was not random luck, but lucky access to particular forms of social and cultural capital. So the teacher who went above and beyond, who really looked out for you, who did more than their job, but it was also teachers, strangers, workmates, bosses, mentors, and so on. Or when luck in the field opened up new routes that they wouldn't otherwise have considered. It wasn't just luck on its own, it was also the extent to which young people could capitalise on and so-called make the most of luck that made a difference. But what we were struck by is how these particular lucky experiences were interrupting the usual course of things. It interrupted maybe the course of their lives that they might have expected. And when we looked at the difference between the young people, it wasn't that those who became socially mobile were somehow better or higher attaining or had more grit or resilience than the other young people. They were incredibly similar in that way. The difference was that they had these lucky moments where they had access to forms of cultural and social capital that they otherwise would not have encountered. So we hypothesise that agency is important for realising luck, but it may be insufficient to produce social mobility in the absence of luck. So we understand all of these factors that we're seeing in our data as a bit like the analogy of a fish trying to swim upstream. Young people trying to pursue chemistry or STEM trajectories have to put in loads of effort and constant effort to make progress against a system, the waterway, that is constantly pushing back against them, making it difficult. So the policy question becomes, should we just focus on trying to make the fish stronger? Or should we also find ways of trying to change the waterway and do things differently? For us, that means looking at the social and economic inequalities associated with our participating in higher education, moving away from explanations that focus on individuals, moving away from these ideas of it's meritocracy, that the best just win out, and really thinking of ways that we can design for luck. For example, supporting the idea of the so-called lucky teacher through long-term relationships of care and equitable pedagogy. So we think we need to do more to really support the wraparound of identity and capital that can support young people to progress in STEM. And for this, we need to focus on changing practice, not changing young people. A key way we think we can do this is to support teachers and practitioners to really understand issues of equity and to embed equitable practice in their everyday teaching. It means we have to challenge these ideas of that you're good at chemistry or science or STEM due to natural talent. We have to look at the gatekeeping and qualification routes. And in higher education, we also need to look at what happens there. There's still too much we are finding in our data around peer sexism, which are affecting issues of access and retention. So I'm going to stop there because I'm out of time, but if you're interested, there are links to our publications where we talk more about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. That was fascinating as always. I've followed the Aspire's work for many years. It just gets better and better. We're learning more and more as we follow these students through their careers. So thank you so much. We've got loads of questions coming into the questions box, which is great. So we're going to come back to those once we've heard from Saleha. So welcome, Saleha. Thank you for joining us. We'll just get your screen shared. Brilliant. I can see your presentation, so I think you're ready to go.
Great. Thank you so much. So if I can just find the right screen, sorry. Thank you so much, Stephen, Natalie and the team for giving me the opportunity to take part today in this amazing webinar. And it's a privilege to be here, especially on Social Mobility Day. So I'm Saleha. I currently work at AstraZeneca in our Emerging Innovations Unit in R&D, looking at identifying and catalysing novel and cutting edge science. So I'm not a subject matter expert on social mobility or socioeconomic diversity. However, I'm super passionate about the area, given my lived experience and navigating my career and my life in general through this. And over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to say a little about data or the lack of in the pharmaceutical sector within the UK. And also, since the theme of Social Mobility Day is to share moments, I'm going to say a little bit about my background and how it's shaped my professional life, and then some of the work that I also do with LRIG, which is a not-for-profit organisation where I sit on the board, and I'm also responsible for their scientific programme as well. So data within the UK pharmaceutical sector is lacking. I'd love to be able to share insights into what the current landscape looks like when it comes to socioeconomic inclusion, but unfortunately we're still in the infancy of our general EDI work. However, last year, the Association of British Pharmaceuticals Industry produced this report. I really recommend you go have a look. It's linked at the bottom, and they pulled out some very interesting insights, or I thought they were quite interesting. So their key findings probably wouldn't surprise anyone. Well, they didn't surprise me. And as an industry, we've made a start in collecting data, setting out strategies and holding our leaders to account. And the main findings that they highlighted were that EDI strategies are solidifying. However, there's still a lot of work to do in assigning ownership and communicating the progress of these. Leaders recognise the importance of EDI, but there are still opportunities to improve representation and accountability. I mean, for instance, only 10% of organisations here said that their leaders were measured against EDI targets, and only 14% even believe that their leaders fully represented them. The good news was that data collection is rising. However, we're still waiting to generate insights and use that data to action plan productively. And only 10% of organisations have comprehensive diversity data. However, 80% of organisations are still to use that data to identify and shape their EDI initiatives. And finally, companies are progressing well with some of their EDI characteristics, but there's still lots of opportunities to broaden impact. And they specifically highlighted in the report the opportunity when it comes to socioeconomic diversity and social mobility. So 41% of organisations at the moment seem to have a reactive approach when it comes to social mobility in the UK pharmaceutical industry. And from the data on the right, you can see a focus on social mobility really lags behind some of the other characteristics, although more organisations are saying that they will be focusing on this in the year to come. The report also highlighted that organisations can use, or the other organisations like the Social Mobility Commission, to understand the recommended data that from the workforce that they need to establish the baseline and also fill that data gap for themselves. And following this, they recommended engaging with the Social Mobility Foundation, who compile the Social Mobility Employer Index, and collaborating with them can help companies build their strategies, look at their recruitment processes, and also monitor progress. So that's kind of the current landscape around the pharma industry in the UK. Data is lacking in some instances, but actually it looks like, you know, more organisations are trying to address some of this. So I think I'm just going to move on to something a little bit different. So the focus of today is Social Mobility Day, and the theme was to share moments. So I just wanted to take you through my journey and my career journey, and I think this kind of really relates back to what Louise was just telling us, because, you know, those people who are talking about serendipity, luck, being fortunate around their career and what's been enabling for them has really something that I can really resonate with in my own particular experience and my background. So when I typically give a talk around my career, I show this slide, and it really just focuses on the successes, you know, where I went to university, what I studied, getting my PhD, and then moving into a large corporate organisation like AstraZeneca, which is now, you know, very well known across the industry. But it often doesn't focus on the other things that I've done or the things that have enabled me to get to where I am. So for instance, as a student from low socioeconomic background, I worked throughout my undergraduate degree. I had a part-time job at the hospital, working late into the evenings. I worked as a student ambassador at the university, picked up odd jobs here and there. So alongside, you know, what am I studying for my degree, my master's, I was also having to work, which I know a lot of my other colleagues or students at the time weren't having to do because they had a good financial support network through their parents or relatives from where they came from, especially if they were from a higher socioeconomic background. And I used to actually, I then went to, I was lucky to be on a master's, which allowed me to get some experience outside of a university. And so I went to do an internship at CR UK towards the end of my master's. Again, I always say I'm lucky that I had the opportunity to get a stipend and be funded for my master's through the BBSRC. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been able to afford to do a master's. I still work part-time to try to top that up for my living expenses, but moving to London, that was a shock. You know, I had to really think about, you know, proactively saving to be able to go to London to work at CR UK. I didn't have a steady income at the time, you know, so I was having to fund myself through that to be able to get that experience to help me progress in my own career. And then more recently, I've been volunteering with a number of organisations to give back and support those from similar backgrounds to myself. So, you know, I work with the 93% Club and also the Social Mobility Foundation and also some of the other organisations that I'll talk about later as well. However, in the interim, if I'm being totally honest, I didn't feel confident talking about my background and being really worried about being judged or it limiting the progression through my career. Even as I first started in AstraZeneca 7 years ago, it was really, I felt, it was something that I could not really openly talk about. Otherwise, I'd be excluded from opportunities. So when it comes to this conversation, I think what's important, especially for early career professionals, is how did I go from, this picture on the left-hand side of this slide, that's the house that I grew up in, where I lived in until I was 18, and like our current Prime Minister, I also didn't have Sky TV. But, but to this contrast of where I am now, I live in a completely, idyllic part of the country, where there is high translation into higher education. It's an affluent area, and I work at, one of these great institutes, and the contrast, there you can see on the slide. And I think the real, the value is really talking about how I went from, this kind of left-hand side of the slide to this right-hand side of the slide, and what's really enabled me to be socially mobile within my life and within my career. And I was thinking about this, and I think, there's been three things I think that really stand out to me throughout my career journey. And, Louise touched on a lot of those things around teachers and, support networks, and being in the right place at the right time, I think is also another one. And also having teachers and mentors who really kind of recognize, or know about opportunities, and then push you or put those in front of you so that you're aware of them. But the three things I'm going to talk about is, firstly, one of the organizations that really helped me between doing my A levels and going to university, and that was the Sutton Trust. So the Sutton Trust was instrumental in giving me exposure to university. I was fortunate to get a place on one of their summer programs at a time where Manchester was trying to encourage more students from the local area, and which were some of the most deprived areas in the UK at the time, with very low translation rates into university across the country. And so this program was designed to give students exposure to university life, to lectures, to give them a chance to maybe spend 2 weeks away from home, living away from home, because I know that was a massive factor when I was thinking about university as well. And also just get support and access to lecturers, expand their networks, and also get mentoring from other students who are already at university, having been through the transition. And there's also, more importantly, I think what the program gave me was financial advice and actually some reassurance around the student debt, because that was one of the things that I was really worried about when I was going to university. And I know many people that I talk to even now from low socioeconomic backgrounds really worry about the student debt and the rising student debt as well. The other thing that I mentioned was mentors and sponsors. So throughout my life, I've had people who have really pushed me, gone above and beyond, and actually taken on, that kind of role to really, make me think about potential opportunities that I can go and find for myself, but also sponsoring me to really, bringing me with them to things that they're involved with, or identifying opportunities for me to be able to get experience and exposure in particular areas. And I think that's really been a factor throughout my primary education, my secondary education, throughout my university life, and also now within AstraZeneca. And I think this bit is really, really important, and one of the reasons why I think and why I support so many younger people from similar backgrounds to myself, because opening up that opportunity and giving people the exposure and also helping them establish a network within the industry where you're coming from a background where those people are not around you, you're not surrounded by professionals, you're not surrounded by people who are, doing chemistry or biology as their day jobs. It can be very difficult to try and get insights into those industries, and also getting the first step into some of these organizations as well. And the other organisation I wanted to mention here was ELRIC, because they have also been instrumental in building my network and giving me opportunities to really early on in my career to take on leadership roles. And actually, I want to talk a little bit more about ELRIC in general and talk about some of the things that we've been doing as an organisation to help support not specifically socioeconomic diversity, but also just EDI in general, but in doing so, how we're trying to help younger people, especially in this space. So LRIG is a not-for-profit organisation, and the purpose of the organisation is to bring the life science and drug discovery community together to learn, connect and collaborate on an open access basis. And we do this through putting on conferences, networking events, webinars and lots of digital content. We've got a community that's over 22,000 scientists from across industry. This is pharma, biotech, also academia and also life sciences suppliers. And one of the things that we're really proud of is that we are making sure that all our events for delegates are free to attend. This is supported through our vendor sponsors and exhibitors, but we really feel passionate that high quality science should be open and available to everybody, especially to younger people who don't have access to this type of content without having to pay thousands of pounds to attend a conference, for instance. And that can be really limiting to people. It's events like these that really bring together leaders across the industry and give people the opportunity to build those networks. And I do think it's one of the things or successes of being socially mobile is to have that network and establish that network, especially early on in your career. So some of the things that we do within LRIG, things that we have done is provide buses from schools and local universities to our events. So especially for our big meeting in drug discovery that happens every year, we often have about 2,000 delegates, but we do work with a lot of schools across the country to try and enable the students to be able to access that, and making sure that transport or accommodation is not the limiting factor for people to access those things. Like I said, all our meetings are free to attend. We offer free refreshments and lunch at our meetings as well, and give everyone this opportunity to network, and also an opportunity for having early career professionals take on volunteering roles as well within the organisation. Our organisation is volunteer led. The majority of people, except for a small subset of our operations team, are all volunteers. Giving those people, these early career professionals, the opportunities to volunteer, it was really enabling for them to also increase their networks, get involved with, meeting senior leaders across the industry, really getting involved with the science as well, as helping their own development as well. And a few more things that we're doing. So we have this event called Network Like a Boss, our biggest meeting, which is drug discovery, like I said, which is happening in October later this year. And again, it's an opportunity. It's like speed dating. We have all our early career professionals sign up, and we have all our bosses. So these are very senior leaders across the industry, across the pharma industry, life sciences. Some of them are academics as well. And it gives everyone an opportunity to go around and talk to all these bosses and these leaders to get more insight, build their networks, and make those connections within the industry. And in addition to that, we're also supporting, school children as well. It's not just, university or postdoc or PhD students here. We do this thing called Big Adventures in Tiny Lab Coats, and that gives local schools, wherever we go, to leave a legacy behind in those kind of, especially the schools where we would expect to see students who come from a lower socioeconomic background who would not necessarily ever have the opportunity to get exposed to this type of event or this type of science, or even meet these people. And so, we work with primary schools and secondary schools in the local community where we host our meetings to try and get some of those students into our meetings as well, and give them exposure as well, to be able to show them what a career in science could potentially be, and get those people engaged and exposed to this as well. And yeah, I think that's where I'm going to stop. So finally, I've got a couple of links here around from all the organisations I talked about. I think Natalie's going to be sharing those as well. And if you wanted to connect with me, you can do so on LinkedIn. And then, yeah, thank you so much for listening. And I'm really looking forward to the questions in the panel next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Saleha. That was great. We've obviously learned quite a bit about the barriers that you faced, and obviously building on what Louise was talking about before that. But then also lovely to see the work of these organisations like LRIG, who are doing such positive work and finding ways to break down some of those barriers, I hope, which sounds really fantastic. Just before I bring the other two back, I've got a question specifically for you. Avtar is asking, what was the split of organisations in your report, large companies versus SMEs, and were there differences seen between the two groups? Do you have that information?
No, unfortunately, I don't have that information on me. So it was not my report. So it was commissioned by the ABPI. And I think if you go into that link that I put into the presentation at the beginning, you'll be able to see the methodology of what they used. And it is kind of going with their member organisations. And if you go onto their website, you can also see all their member organisations as well, who they have within their community within the UK. I mean, AstraZeneca is one of them, but I know there's lots of other pharmaceutical companies and other leaders in the industry also who are part of their member organisations.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. I'm sure that link is in the chat, so hopefully people can go and follow that up. Okay, so let's welcome Louise and Stephen back on screen now. I have to say, we've got such a busy questions box. So brilliant. Thank you so much to the audience. You're really engaged with the content here, probably because we've had some fantastic presentations. We've covered a lot of detail. But as I said, let's look at some of those barriers. We've looked a lot throughout the presentations, the barriers to students from low socioeconomic backgrounds entering into chemistry and staying. But I want to move on a little bit to what can universities and maybe employers do to support these students? I don't know, it's to anyone, I'm sure you all have comments to add to this, but yeah, I'll let any of you take the floor.
I'll jump in if no one else wants to.
Please do, that's great.
Thanks. So, I mean, I think the trouble is there's no one quick, cheap thing that can be done. So I think part of what we can do is recognise this as a complex issue. It needs lots of people all coming together, working across different fronts. So I think so it's not just employers, it's not just universities. I think, you know, from our research, we're saying that some of the issues are starting really quite young. So we need to do more within schools. We think that by supporting teachers, it can really, really help. It can make a big difference. But there's also a role for out of school sectors and so on. Like at university, I think also not just focusing on getting people in, you know, Slaya's talking about, it's about how do we create that wraparound of support, particularly for people from underrepresented backgrounds who don't have the same capital and privileges as other people. How do we provide that and ensure people continue, they complete their degrees and then into the workforce and beyond? So I think for us, it's about looking at how we change the system, change practices, and not only focus on just trying to change young people.
Absolutely. Do you have anything to add, Slaya or Stephen?
I can say, you know, I think, Louise, you're absolutely right. I think it needs to be a collaborative effort, you know, right from like early years all the way into the workforce. And, you know, I highlighted that, you know, within industry specifically, I think we could start with actually capturing that data. But although it's exceptionally hard to capture that data in industry, you know, I mentioned how, you know, there were quite a few years where I just did not want to talk about my background. And a lot of people feel like they come into the workforce and they've shed that background. They don't want to talk about it. They feel it's limiting for them. And so how do we actually bring it to the front of the conversation where people, you know, at the moment, you know, a lot of people do feel uncomfortable having these conversations as well. And I think having that data and then enabling organizations to build a strategy of how they address this, you know, I think that's really a starting point, and trying to work collaboratively and in partnership with a lot of organizations who have more experience around this area, I think is really important.
And actually, that's, you know, partly why Stephen and the RSC came to us at Chemistry World to run this webinar, because it is one of those things, as you say, that professionals aren't talking about. And so how do we get people talking about it? Well, you know, we decided let's start with this webinar and open up this topic. And I see from, you know, the registrations we've had, we've got so much interest from a really broad range of academia and industry. We've got a great audience in here today, really mixed. And we're focusing on the chemical sciences, but as we said, it applies across all of STEM, as we know. So, what, apart from us kind of opening up this topic, what else can professionals do? How can we get people talking about it within businesses to create this more open and inclusive dialogue? Have we got any ideas? Because I know we've got people in the audience who are going to be wondering, what can I do now? What can I do within my own business or my academic area?
I'm happy to go in with that. So I think, yeah, I totally agree with what's been said in terms of the barriers, in terms of the initiatives that we can do. But I think one of the things that sort of limits a lot of progression is that perception of socioeconomic background. Coming from a low socioeconomic background, we know it's got a significant role in shaping individuals' experiences and opportunities. But these stereotype labels, across whole classes of people, and it's the biases that justify the inequalities. They didn't want to go to university, they weren't smart enough, as opposed to the systematic barriers that were preventing access and progression. And I think that's something that's been very important, and something that has been exacerbated by political influences in certain segments of the media, in the past year or so, undermining the inclusion diversity efforts as well. I think it's also important that to remember that you don't need to have lived experiences to support those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and the importance of being an ally or advocating for that inclusive access at your organisation, at your institution, and again increasing the ability to collect the data. That's something that I think is missing, and I think it's something that's linked back to the perception and the stigma associated.
Absolutely. I think, it is having that data. A lot of us here, we're scientists, we're working in science, we like to see some data, and actually it informs us. Even if we don't have that lived experience, we're informed then about those barriers. So it's, the Aspire study and all these kind of studies that we're looking at are really important for then being an ally, because you're learning then about the topic. So I'm glad we've got all those links shared for people to look on that. Now, we've had a great comment from Tipu about tuition fees, actually, and how student loans are basically not accessible to everybody. And it might be for a whole host of reasons, but particularly for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they might not be able to take out interest-based loans for various reasons. I don't know if anyone knows anything about this. Stephen maybe might be the most well placed for this. Are there any initiatives by the government or the RSC to offer means-tested interest-free loans? It's a great question.
Unfortunately, no, I don't know anything at the moment, but obviously, yeah, with the interest-free loans, there's the cultural significance as well, the background, which, that makes it difficult to take out interest or unavailable to them. But something that we are currently working on is looking at our undergraduate, so chemistry undergraduate students, and we have the quantitative data, but we also have gaps in our knowledge. And so the next step is to really dive deep into the qualitative data so that we can better understand the experiences, the barriers that are in place, and that will allow us to have the evidence base to then speak with our policy team, our parliamentary affairs team, to then push for that change and advocate on behalf of the chemical sciences.
Absolutely. Going back to kind of the school side of things, I've got a fair few questions on what I'm going to call that kind of wider support. We all know how important teachers can be. I think, you speak to so many people in science, go, oh, it was this teacher at this stage that really inspired me and pushed me and everything. And I had that same experience. So we can say teachers can be brilliant. But what about that wider stuff, like the careers advisors and the after school clubs? Now, we've seen obviously in Louise's example about, some students from low socioeconomic backgrounds can't access those clubs, but how important are those initiatives and clubs to helping students? Do we have any information about that?
I think we know that they add value. So they can't solve the issue on their own, but they're an important piece of the puzzle. And I think what we currently have is a lot of really nice and well-meaning initiatives, but they're not joined up, and we can't expect one organisation to do it all. We need to have better joining up in pathways. So, for example, when a young person comes and does a scheme, they're really inspired by it. What happens next? How do we pass them on? How do we create pathways for progression? So I think that linking up piece could be really valuable across the informal sector.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, it's that joined up thinking, isn't it? And it can be very sporadic, these things, these trips that can inspire people. Some schools don't get them, some schools do. It just depends very much, again, on the teacher, what they can offer as well within that individual school. A really good question about, is there anything we can learn from other non-STEM fields where they've made progress in this area? I'm thinking maybe the arts or different areas. Is there anything we can bring into the STEM field? I realise they're very different areas, but is there anything that broadly applies?
Yeah, I think so. So if you look at some of the areas like finance and consulting, I think socioeconomic diversity is really at the forefront when you go onto their recruitment pages. You know, when you go on there, you know, a lot of, you know, science organizations, what I see when I go on there is they're focusing on gender diversity, the ethnicity, but socioeconomic diversity seems to be something that's, you know, a lot lower on the list at the moment. Whereas, you know, in some of these other sectors, they do seem to have been more proactive in this area because it crosses over so many of those intersectionalities that we talked about. I think it's very important to recognize that. And I do appreciate when with large global organizations that's difficult, right? Because we're talking specifically UK here, so they might be, you know, different challenges in different parts of the world. But I think that's I think recruitment is something that we can learn from, I think, from organizations outside of STEM. But yeah, Louise and Stephen might have other things to add from the more academic university sectors as well.
Yeah, I think there's things we can always learn from other sectors, but I also think from other countries as well. Like particularly, I mean, our research focuses on England. We often assume we're the centre of the world and that we always have done things like this, so this is how it should be. But actually, other countries can do some of this better, and I think we can learn from those contexts about what could change.
Absolutely, yeah, you're right though. Yeah, we are very much focusing on the UK and particularly England in here, I guess. But the broader UK with Stephen's work. But yeah, absolutely, we should be looking to the rest of the world because and situations are very different wherever we're looking. Okay, we haven't got much time left. I'm going to say I probably only have time for one more question. So I've got so many. Please do get in touch with Stephen at the RSC if you've got more questions. I think we might have shared Soleia's LinkedIn profile, but I'm sure we'll be able to find that. Same with Louise. Okay, I don't know what question to end on. It's really tricky because I've got so many. Maybe something positive about how our attendees can get involved after this with efforts to advance social mobility in the chemical sciences, and also just feeding into that because I want to get into 2 questions really. Any advice we can give to students from low socioeconomic backgrounds who want to aspire and succeed in the chemical sciences? So yeah, we'll try and handle something positive here, some actions that people can take. Maybe I'll start. I'm going to pick something. I'm going to start with Soleia, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I kind of alluded to this at the start, right? Or at the end of my presentation, I talked about the organisation LRIG that I'm involved with. We do a lot of things, a lot of work in the EDI space. I think, you know, all our meetings are free to attend and anyone can volunteer with us. And also it's an opportunity for young people to also gain experience and exposure to the industry as well through things like the network like a boss session that I mentioned, and to give them the opportunity to increase their networks as well. So absolutely go check them out. You know, we run a number of meetings across the year. I think the Royal Society of Chemistry is actually going to be at our drug discovery meeting hosting 2 scientific tracks. So you can definitely come to our meetings. It's going to be at London Excel 2nd and 3rd of October towards the end of this year. So please go check out the website and sign up because I think it's absolutely amazing the content that we're able to offer free to access and really enabling for people and their careers.
Brilliant, thank you. Louise, because you're next on my screen, I'll come to you.
Thanks. I'd say if you want ideas of what more you could do, look at our report, our chemistry report, that should have the link for it. And if you work in a company and you're like a STEM ambassador, I'd say use our equity compass tool that we've produced from one of our other projects, because that will really help you think about how to engage really equitably with diverse young people or audiences that you're engaging with.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, Stephen.
Yeah, I would highly recommend the Equity Compass. It's a very good course to complete. I think as the Royal Society of Chemistry, we're in the position to have a significant impact on socioeconomic inclusion within the chemical sciences, but I think what's been discussed today is we can't do it on our own, and we need to be working with our community, engaging with our members. We have our education and outreach funds that are there to support initiatives, funding grants, research mobility grants, grants for carers, accessibility, mentorship, professional development, our commitment to inclusion, diversity, the work that we've done in the past, our reports. And again, that promoting accessible resources, so moving towards open access with our publications, again, is, you know, really sort of strong way moving forward. And, you know, I think just get in touch with the Royal Society of Chemistry if there is anything that, you know, you're looking to develop or you're looking to have those contacts or networks, please get in touch and we would be more than happy to help support you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's been absolutely amazing. I've learned more. I always learn more about this topic every time I go near it. So brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing from Stephen, Louise and Solaire today. So thank you so much for joining us. A very good overview of a very complex topic. If you missed anything today or you need to go back and check anything you heard, then, as I said, a recording of the webinar will be emailed out to everyone who registered shortly. And thank you so much to you, our audience, for getting involved in the conversation. We've had so many fantastic questions. If I didn't ask your questions specifically, I was trying to wrap them into very broader questions because we had so much to get through. If you've enjoyed this webinar, then please do fill out the exit survey for us, or if you haven't enjoyed it, let us know. We'd like to know what you'd like to hear from us in the future, particularly on this social mobility topic. If you want to learn more or hear more, we'd love to hear from you. But also check out chemistryworld.com/webinars for our future events. We've got quite a few webinars coming up. But from everyone here at Chemistry World and the RSC, we look forward to seeing you again in a future Chemistry World webinar. Thank you and goodbye.